The New York Rangers had a pretty rough start to this season as they began things 0-1 after picking up a loss in the season opener at home against the Pittsburgh Penguins, who of course are expected to be one of the worst teams in the entire NHL. So it was a pretty disappointing performance there. Not only did you lose the season opener to a not great team, but you did it at home and also got shut out. So it was a pretty bad look for the team, but they ended up bouncing back in a pretty decent way there against the Buffalo Sabres in game 2, which was of course away in Buffalo. So the team had a bit of a bounce back there, which was good. Of course, both these games have been against some teams that aren't expected to be some of the best in the league, but they still end up bouncing back here with a decent win. And of course, this team has seen a lot of changes since the beginning of last regular season, not only with the players on the defense and forward side of things, but also of course with the coaching staff as well. So we're seeing lots of new players come in here, and lots of players, whether they are new to this team or have been around for a bit of time now, they're of course all learning a new system together. So it very well might end up taking a little while for this team to really start clicking together and really start building off it. But I do think this team should be hopefully better than what they were last season. And in today's video, we've got lots of stuff to talk about involving the Rangers and kind of their first 2 games so far. We're going to talk about some of the positives, some of the negatives. We've got an injury to kind of talk about, unfortunately, with a very important player to this team. And, there are just a few players that I think have, looked really great so far to start. A couple of guys maybe haven't looked phenomenal, but we're just going to kind of dive into it here and just talk about some takeaways that I have from the first 2 games of this season. So let's get right into it here, and we're going to start off by talking about quickly the Vincent Trocheck injury. He, of course, ended up having to leave the game Thursday night against the Buffalo Sabres with an injury, so it's definitely a little worrying. It's reported to be an upper body injury, but as of right now, we don't exactly know the severity of it, so of course, I'll have you updated once that news does come out. But as of right now, we don't exactly know how long he could potentially be out for or whether or not he's going to be back pretty soon. So we'll just have to wait and see when that news does officially come out. But moving on and talking about Artemi Panarin and JT Miller. These, of course, are 2 players who ended up missing a lot of time throughout training camp and preseason. They, of course, both dealt with their own injuries. And I would say so far throughout these 2 games, it definitely does not look like either Miller or Panarin are near 100%. And, that's kind of not necessarily a good thing, of course, but it is a kind of silver lining to this. So, seeing the Rangers offense kind of not look phenomenal in game 1 there against the Penguins, and then, slowly in the Buffalo game start to kind of get things going there. They had some good chances early on, couldn't bury one. They end up scoring, of course, and then add on a few goals later on in the game near the end of it. So I think overall the offense, definitely didn't look phenomenal throughout these first 2 games, but I think, of course, like I said, there is a silver lining to that with the fact that, Miller and Panarin, of course, did miss a lot of time throughout preseason and training camp, so they couldn't quite, really get things going there with their line mates, of course, and you really continue to build that chemistry, especially for, a line of, like Will Cooley, JT Miller, and Mika Zibanejad. Those are, of course, guys who don't have an abundance of time to play together like, the Panarin, Trocheck, and Lafreniere line, of course, has in past seasons. So I think that was definitely not great, but they ended up coming through there in the game against the Buffalo Sabres. We saw, JT Miller, of course, get a goal and an assist, and then we saw Panarin get an assist. So I think they looked definitely a little better in game 2 there against Buffalo than what they did in game 1 against the Penguins, but they still, I would say, clearly are not at 100%. So at least once they hopefully fully get healthy, then we can see this team's offense really start to get going ideally. And next up here, we've got Carson Soucy, who of course has faced a lot of heat since joining this Rangers team at last season's NHL trade deadline. Of course, he got picked up from the Vancouver Canucks, got dealt over to the Rangers, and he definitely didn't himself play great last season, but there were many players, not only on the defensive side of things, but just in general on the Rangers, that had a bit of a down year or just straight up played bad for the most part. So, I never really kind of fully put that on Soucy and him just, being just that bad, for example. I always had kind of some hope there that he could be a pretty decent defenseman for this team. And, so far throughout these two games, I think he has looked pretty solid there on that second pair with Will Borgen. Of course, they both have actually played together in the past when they were both with the Seattle Kraken together. So they've got some experience already previously being played together. So they've got a bit of chemistry, maybe. And obviously, we've kind of seen a little bit of that. And they ended up actually contributing there for a goal as well in this game. We saw a nice little kind of D-to-D pass there. Borgen over to Soucy on the left side, and Soucy shoots and scores. So, I mean, honestly, I think it was, a pretty nice thing to see there. Soucy, just kind of skates in a little bit there and rips one kind of low left, just beating Alex Line, and he ends up, giving the Rangers an extra bit of lead there. But the point being, of course, I just think this is someone who, yeah, he might not be some phenomenal second pairing caliber guy, but I think at worst is going to be just a kind of decent defenseman. Like, I don't think he's going to be a massive liability. I don't think he's going to be, causing as many kind of big turnovers and kind of absolutely massive poor plays defensively like we saw at guys like Keandre and Jacob Trouba at moments. He'll have some here and there, I'm sure, but this is a guy who I think, now that he's had a full offseason with the team there, he's in a new system, he's alongside his guy there in Will Borgen, who he's played with before. I don't see why he can't just be a solid guy for this team. And, of course, I've talked about it in past videos, and I still think, if this team really wants to be able to make some things happen there in the playoffs and, go on a long run there and make it, they might have to end up trying to look to upgrade that, second spot there on the left side for the defense core. But Soucy, either way, whether you want to kind of, ship him off in that deal because he has that nice cap it there at 3.25, if you have to move him off the books there to make a real good kind of player come in, that's okay there, of course. But if you do end up being able to just kind of shift down a guy like Vaakanainen into your number 7 spot there, have Soucy on that third pair, and then add in that new top 4 guy on the left side in the second pair, I think that could make this D-core look pretty solid. And next up here, we've got Igor Shesterkin, who is truly looking like he is in his Vezina caliber form. This is someone who, of course, has only allowed a single goal so far throughout the first 2 games of the season for the Rangers. He got that shutout in the game against Buffalo, allowed 1 goal in the game against Pittsburgh, of course, because they got a couple empty netters afterwards. But this is a guy who is looking phenomenal to begin this season, and that is exactly what I kind of thought would happen and was hoping for. Igor is still one of the top goalies in the entire NHL. Some fans don't seem to think so, but this is a guy who he just does show up when the things matter most. I mean, you take a look at his playoff numbers. They're absolutely elite, and even last year in what was a pretty big down year for him, he was pretty terrible for his standards. He still was like a top 10, 15 goalie in the entire NHL, even in a pretty disastrous season for his standards, while playing behind a pretty terrible, New York Rangers team defensively, right? This team defensively were pretty atrocious last season there, right? We watched those games there with, at the start of the season, Trouba still there and, Keandre making his massive turnovers and Lindgren, definitely not looking in prime form there, of course. Those guys ended up getting dealt off this team. So that's why I don't see why this team can't be a whole lot better defensively. And I don't see why Igor can't be right in the mix this season for a Vezina trophy. So I think this is someone who, he's already got a shutout. He's got that 0.5 goals against average, like a .985 save percentage to start things off here through 2 games. Yes, it has not been against the best competition, but I think Igor himself has made some really good stops. He's looked really solid in the net so far, and I just think overall this could definitely be a year where we see him right back up in the mix for the Vezina, and we could possibly see him end up winning his second of his career. And next up here, we've got the New York Rangers' fourth line, which I think has looked pretty good so far throughout these first 2 games. We knew that this was going to be a line, of course, that, may not, of course, bring a lot of offense there with Adam Edstrom, Sam Carrick, and Matt Rempe, being that fourth line. But what they are going to bring is a pretty good defensive unit that's, might not be some top shutdown line, but can hold their own for sure defensively. But they're going to bring a heavy forecheck, a lot of energy, toughness, physicality, and just some of that stuff that this Rangers team needs. I mean, last season there, I thought this fourth line worked really great together, and I think they're only going to be better this season there with, guys like Adam Edstrom hopefully staying healthy, and a guy like, Carrick and Rempe and Edstrom just getting more chemistry together, but also guys like Rempe especially, taking that next step in their game, and a guy like Edstrom as well, as, these are still 2 very young, inexperienced pro wingers. I mean, I guess a guy like Edstrom has played quite a few games there over, at the pro level in Europe, but these are still two young, fairly inexperienced guys for the NHL level that are, of course, very big. They're like 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", whatever. They're very, very tall players, and sometimes those bigger players can take a little longer to really develop along. So that's where maybe in a year or two, we still can see guys like, Edstrom and Rempe. I don't see why they can't, take another step in their game maybe. And they may never become, phenomenal top six forwards, of course, but I think Edstrom and Rempe, they can be some really great and valuable kind of bottom six, fourth line players to have for years and years to come. You got to have these kind of players in your bottom six there, especially on your fourth line. So I definitely think they're all great players to have in this fourth line role, and as a unit there, they should be honestly probably one of the better fourth line units in the entire NHL. And next up, I wanted to talk a bit about the improved defensive play from this Rangers team because, although I don't think they're going to be some, top five defensive team this year, I definitely think they should be a whole lot better than what they were last season as, they were pretty terrible last season at moments, and that was definitely a massive reason on why this team did not make playoffs was the poor defensive play. So I think through 2 games so far, yes, it has been against 2 not great teams, of course, in the Penguins and also the Buffalo Sabres. I still think this team defensively have definitely looked a bit better than last season, of course, and have just been, pretty solid overall. I don't think they've given up too many kind of crazy high danger chances there. Haven't made too many kind of terrible turnovers in the defensive zone for the most part. So I think they have looked a little better than last season there. And, you just got to consider, you've got, the best partner Adam Fox has ever had before in Vladislav Gavrikov now. It might take them a little bit to get really going there together, but this could be the Rangers' top kind of defense pair for the next 5, 6, 7 years potentially. Then you've got a guy like, of course, Braden Schneider, who you hope can kind of take that next step in his game. You've got a guy like Will Borgen, who now has a full offseason under his belt, and he's a guy who can maybe take another step in his game also. I still think Adam Fox is one of the better defensemen in the entire NHL, and of course he had a pretty bad 2024-25 regular season, so I expect him to be a whole lot better than what he was. We got rid of guys like Keandre and Trouba who were liabilities at moments, and even a guy like Lindgren who wasn't too great last season. So, I think overall this team defensively has already looked a lot better and definitely should be a lot better than what they were throughout last season. And moving into the next part here, I wanted to talk a bit about the offense. I think so far, of course, guys like JT Miller and Panarin haven't been at 100% there. They haven't looked phenomenal, but I think some guys who have looked pretty good so far throughout these 2 games have been Lafreniere and Zibanejad. Lafreniere more so in the Buffalo game. I think he looked pretty good there. And of course, got the first goal there of the season for the Rangers. Pretty nice when they're battling around the net, but obviously Zibanejad has continuously throughout these 2 games so far, been in and around the net, creating chances, getting some good looks there. He hasn't quite really started to put them away yet, but I think he's getting some good looks there. He's getting some real good chances, and I'm sure at some point there, he'll get these goals start to really come. So I think overall, this team, just in general, top to bottom, is looking a lot better than last season there. They should be better going forward as this team does continue to get more chemistry. And, they're also, like I said earlier, they're all learning a new system. Even guys like Foxy and, Zibanejad, who have been here forever now, it feels like, have been here for so long, they're all still learning the new system as well. So it might take a few weeks or a month or 2 to really see this team start clicking, but once they do, I don't see why this team can't be one of the better teams in the entire Metropolitan Division, one of the better teams in the entire Eastern Conference, and honestly, could be up there in the entire NHL. They might not be up there in the top 5 or the top 80 in the entire NHL, but they definitely should be at least a playoff caliber team this season and definitely should be right up there in the mix for one of those top 3 spots in the Metropolitan Division. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching today's video. If you have enjoyed, definitely don't forget to click that like and subscribe button for daily New York Rangers content, as I do post a video about the New York Rangers every single day at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And also, definitely don't forget to comment down below your thoughts on today's video. What are your thoughts on this New York Rangers team defensively, offensively? What are your thoughts on that Trocheck injury? What are your thoughts on Lafreniere's advantage? Let me know your thoughts and what you've seen from this team so far throughout these first 2 games. I'll catch you next one, and let's go Rangers.